My name is Eleanor, and at 68 years old, I never thought my own son would break my heart. After sacrificing everything for Bradley, I stood alone at his lavish wedding, watching the celebration from the shadows. When dinner came, I received cold leftovers on a chipped plate. She's used to eating what life leaves behind. Bradley laughed to his new wife as everyone joined in. No one even noticed when I slipped away in tears. But what I did the next morning changed everything. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like and subscribe button, and let me know in the comments if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family. I became a widow when Bradley was just 5 years old. My husband Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving me with a small life insurance policy, a mountain of medical bills, and a confused little boy who couldn't understand why his daddy wasn't coming home. Those early days were a blur of grief, fear, and determination. I remember sitting at our kitchen table late at night, bills spread out before me, trying to figure out how to make ends meet while Bradley slept upstairs clutching his father's old sweater. With only a high school diploma, my options were limited. I took on 3 jobs: receptionist at a dental office during weekdays, waitressing evenings at a local diner, and bookkeeping for small businesses on weekends. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My mother watched Bradley when she could, but her health was failing, so I often brought him with me to the diner, setting him up in a corner booth with homework and a chocolate milkshake. Despite our struggles, I was determined that Bradley would have every opportunity. I sold my wedding ring to pay for his piano lessons when he showed musical talent. I pawned the antique pocket watch that had belonged to my grandfather to cover the deposit for a better apartment in a school district known for academic excellence. When Bradley needed braces, I sold the pearl necklace Thomas had given me on our 10th anniversary. Each sacrifice felt worth it when I saw Bradley thriving. By working extra shifts and cutting every possible corner in our budget, I managed to send Bradley to St. James Preparatory Academy for high school. The tuition was astronomical, but Bradley's grades were exceptional, and he received a partial scholarship. To cover the remainder, I took out a second mortgage on our modest home, and postponed my own dream of returning to college to complete the education I'd abandoned when I got married at 19. Bradley excelled at St. James. He was popular, earned top grades, and was elected class president in his senior year. I beamed with pride at his graduation ceremony, though I felt out of place among the wealthy parents in their designer clothes. I wore the same blue dress I'd worn to 3 previous parent-teacher conferences, carefully steamed and with a new costume jewelry brooch to freshen it up. The sacrifices intensified when Bradley was accepted to Princeton. Even with scholarships and financial aid, the costs were staggering. I sold our family car and took the bus to work. I rented out our spare bedroom to a nursing student. I even sold the diamond earrings that had been in my family for generations. Nothing was too precious if it meant giving Bradley the future he deserved. Something changed during those college years. The sweet, thoughtful boy who used to leave me handmade Mother's Day cards slowly transformed into someone I barely recognized. His calls became less frequent, his visits home shorter and filled with complaints about our cramped house and embarrassing neighborhood. He began speaking with a slight affected accent and using words he knew I wouldn't understand. When I asked about his classes or friends, his answers were vague and dismissive. Then came Amelia. Bradley brought her home during spring break of his junior year. She was beautiful, poised, and clearly from money. Her casual references to family vacations in the Maldives and her father's corporate jet made me acutely aware of every crack in our ceiling, every worn patch on our sofa. I tried my best to welcome her, cooking Bradley's favorite pot roast and using the good china that had been my mother's. "Mom still lives like it's the 1980s, Bradley joked when Amelia commented on our landline phone. I laughed along, but the sting lingered. Amelia's father, Frederick Hamilton, was a third-generation investment banker whose family name adorned buildings at several Ivy League schools. Her mother, Judith, had never worked outside the home but served on the boards of prestigious cultural institutions and chaired exclusive charity galas. When Bradley announced their engagement after just 8 months of dating, I was shocked but tried to share in his happiness. "Have you discussed the financial arrangements?" Frederick asked Bradley during their first dinner together, not even attempting to include me in the conversation. Amelia's trust fund conditions are quite specific about prenuptial agreements. I watched my son nod eagerly, as if his future father-in-law's approval meant everything. Of course, sir. I completely understand the need to protect family assets. Family assets. The phrase echoed in my head as I thought of the education fund I'd created by saving every spare penny, the life insurance policy I'd maintained even when we could barely afford groceries, the house I'd struggled to keep so Bradley would always have a home. Would those modest assets need protection too? The engagement party at the Hamiltons' estate in Greenwich was my first real glimpse into the world Bradley was entering. Their home looked like something from a magazine, with manicured gardens and staff in uniform serving champagne. I'd spent 2 weeks' grocery money on a new dress for the occasion but still felt hopelessly out of place. Bradley introduced me to fewer than half the guests, and each time he did, he quickly moved on as if afraid I might say something embarrassing. "Your son has such potential," Judith told me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're so pleased he's found his way into the right circles finally." The right circles. As if everything I'd sacrificed to give him a good life had been merely a stepping stone to the world he truly belonged in. A world that had no place for me. As wedding plans began, I noticed Bradley calling me less and less. When I reached out to him, his responses were short and often delayed. "Just busy with work and wedding stuff, Mom. Amelia's handling most of it." When I offered to help with addressing invitations or choosing flowers, my suggestions were politely but firmly declined. "Amelia has very specific tastes," Bradley explained, as if I couldn't possibly understand the complexities of proper wedding planning. "And her mother has connections with all the best vendors." I tried to connect with Amelia, inviting her for lunch or coffee, but she was always too busy with bridesmaids' fittings or cake tastings that somehow never included me. The woman who had raised my son alone, who had given up everything to secure his future, was becoming a footnote in his life story. 6 months before the wedding, I called Bradley to offer help with preparations. "I could assist with the invitations or perhaps the favors," I suggested, picturing us working together like we used to on his school projects. "That's sweet, Mom, but we've hired a professional calligrapher for the invitations," Bradley replied. "And the favors are being custom-made in France. Everything's under control." A week later, I discovered through Facebook that Amelia had hosted a lavish bridal shower at the Plaza Hotel. The photos showed Bradley's Aunt Susan, my late husband's sister, among the guests. I hadn't been invited. When I called Bradley to ask about it, he sounded annoyed. "It was just for Amelia's close friends and family, Mom. I figured you wouldn't want to drive all the way into the city for something like that." But Susan had been there. Susan, who had seen Bradley only at Christmas and his birthday each year, while I had been there for every skin knee, every school play, every moment of his life. The bachelor party was another event I learned about secondhand. Not that I expected to attend, but finding out through an Instagram photo of Bradley and his friends boarding a private jet to Las Vegas was another reminder of my growing irrelevance. I sent a text wishing him fun and received a thumbs-up emoji in response. When the time came for wedding dress shopping, I received an actual invitation. My heart lifted at the thought of being included in this important tradition. I took the day off work, bought a new blouse I couldn't afford, and arrived at the exclusive bridal salon 15 minutes early, a small gift bag containing my mother's antique handkerchief in hand. Judith and 5 of her friends were already there, champagne flutes in hand. Amelia's 3 bridesmaids arrived moments later. Throughout the 3-hour appointment, I was relegated to a chair in the corner, my opinions neither sought nor acknowledged. When I finally gathered the courage to suggest Amelia try a classic A-line style, Judith laughed. "Oh, Eleanor, that's so outdated. Amelia needs something fashion-forward. This is going to be featured in Town and Country, after all." Before leaving, I offered Amelia the handkerchief. This was my mother's. It's over 100 years old and has been carried by brides in my family for generations. I thought perhaps you might like it for your something old and something blue. Amelia took the delicate lace square between 2 fingers as if it might contaminate her. "That's really not necessary, Eleanor. We've already commissioned a custom handkerchief with our monogram and wedding date in platinum thread." 2 weeks later, I invited Bradley and Amelia to dinner at my home. I'd spent days cleaning, borrowed a nice tablecloth from a neighbor, and prepared Bradley's favorite foods. After dinner, I brought out a velvet box containing my grandmother's pearl and sapphire jewelry set. These were my grandmother's, then my mother's, then mine, I explained, opening the box to reveal the elegant necklace and matching earrings. I wore them at my wedding, and I'd be honored if Amelia would consider wearing them at yours. Bradley exchanged a glance with Amelia before responding. Mom, that's really thoughtful, but we want new things for our wedding, not old hand-me-downs. Amelia's father is buying her jewelry from Tiffany to match her engagement ring. Hand-me-downs. The pieces I'd cherished that connected our family across generations, dismissed as if they were second-hand clothes too shabby to wear. As the wedding date approached, I received fewer updates and more surprises. The ceremony had been moved from the Hamilton family church to the Botanical Garden. The reception would now be a black tie affair at the country club instead of the originally planned garden party. Each change was communicated as a fait accompli, with no consideration for my input. Then came the financial requests. Despite having no say in the planning, I was expected to contribute. Traditionally, the mother of the groom handles the rehearsal dinner, Judith informed me over a brief, uncomfortable lunch. We've taken the liberty of reserving the private dining room at Le Bernardin. The estimated cost is $40,000.
$40,000.
More than half my annual income. When I suggested a more modest venue, Judith looked at me as if I'd proposed hosting the dinner in a fast food restaurant. I ended up selling my vintage Mustang, the one luxury I'd allowed myself after Bradley graduated college, to cover the cost. The rehearsal dinner was another exercise in humiliation. Despite being the host and paying for the entire event, I was seated at a table far from the bride and groom, with Amelia's distant cousins who talked around me rather than to me. During the toasts, Bradley thanked the Hamiltons profusely for welcoming him into their family, but mentioned me only briefly as the woman who raised me. As I returned from the restroom, I overheard Judith talking to her sister. The poor thing clearly spent her entire savings on that dress, and it still looks like it came from a department store clearance rack. Bradley has come so far from those humble beginnings. I waited for my son to defend me, to acknowledge the sacrifices I'd made, but he merely nodded and changed the subject to their upcoming honeymoon in Bali. That night, I cried myself to sleep for the first time since Thomas died. Not just for the money spent or the disrespect shown, but for the loss of the son I thought I knew. The boy who once made me breakfast in bed on my birthday, and wrote poems about how I was his hero, had become a man who seemed ashamed of the very things I'd sacrificed to give him. The morning of Bradley's wedding dawned bright and clear. I'd been awake since 4, anxiety churning in my stomach. While Amelia and her bridesmaids enjoyed a catered breakfast and professional hair and makeup services at the Hamilton estate, I prepared alone in my hotel room, carefully applying the makeup I'd splurged on at the department store. I arrived at the Botanical Garden 2 hours early, hoping to help with last-minute preparations or simply to spend a few moments with my son before he took this momentous step. The venue was already bustling with vendors and wedding party members. "Can I help with anything?" I asked the wedding coordinator, a sleek young woman with a tablet and headset. She glanced at me with faint confusion. "And you are?" "Eleanor Parker, Bradley's mother." Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something like pity. "Oh, Mrs. Parker. No, everything's under control. It's probably best if you just find a seat when it's time. We wouldn't want you to get your outfit wrinkled before the ceremony." I retreated to a stone bench in a quiet corner of the garden, watching from a distance as photographers captured Amelia's arrival. The bridesmaids adjusting her train, Judith fussing over every detail. No one sought me out for photos with the groom. No one asked for my blessing, or thanked me for raising the man Amelia was about to marry. When the ceremony began, I discovered there was no reserved seat for me in the front row. After a moment of awkward hesitation, I slipped into a vacant chair in the back row, next to people I'd never met. During the processional, I caught Bradley's eye briefly. He gave a small nod but no smile before turning his full attention to his bride. The wedding coordinator approached me during the cocktail hour, looking flustered. "Mrs. Parker, I'm so sorry for the confusion earlier. I didn't realize you were the groom's mother." She lowered her voice. "I thought you might be a family friend or distant relative. The seating chart has you at table 19. Table 19 turned out to be the furthest from the head table, positioned near the kitchen entrance. My tablemates included two of Amelia's father's work colleagues who had been invited for political reasons, the videographer's assistant who wasn't actually supposed to be seated with guests, and an elderly great-aunt of Amelia's who was hard of hearing and spoke only French. The first course was served, a delicate lobster bisque that I barely tasted. I watched as Bradley and Amelia fed each other bites, laughing and kissing while camera flashes captured their joy. The second course came and went. Then the main course began to arrive. I watched as tables 1 through 18 were served. The waitstaff moved efficiently, presenting plates with flourish to the important guests. As they approached the outer tables, their pace quickened, their presentation less careful. By the time they reached table 19, they were rushing back to the kitchen for the next round. Except they skipped my place setting. I sat quietly, not wanting to make a scene, assuming they would return. The elderly French aunt beside me received her filet mignon, as did the two businessmen. Even the videographer's assistant was served. But my place remained empty. When everyone at surrounding tables had nearly finished their meals, I finally caught the eye of a passing server. "Excuse me, I haven't received my main course." His eyes widened. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Let me check on that right away." 10 minutes later, as plates were being cleared from nearby tables, a different server hurriedly placed a plate before me. The same filet mignon everyone else had enjoyed, but mine was visibly smaller. The edges dried out, the sauce congealed. The vegetables were wilted, the potato puree stiff with a skin formed on top. It was clearly leftovers that had been sitting under a heat lamp for too long. I picked at the food, trying to maintain my dignity. Then I heard Bradley's voice, suddenly louder as he approached with Amelia on his arm, greeting guests at each table. When they reached table 19, Bradley's eyes barely registered my presence before moving on to the French great-aunt, greeting her warmly in practiced French. Amelia leaned down to kiss her relative's cheek while I sat unacknowledged. "Bradley," I said softly, touching his sleeve. "The dinner is lovely." He glanced at my plate, and something like embarrassment crossed his face, quickly replaced by a smirk. He turned to Amelia and said loudly enough for the entire table to hear, "Looks like Mom got the leftovers again. Don't worry about it though. She's used to eating what life leaves behind." Amelia tittered a high false laugh. The businessman chuckled uncomfortably. The videographer's assistant looked away in embarrassment. "It's fine," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "See? She's fine with it," Bradley continued, his voice carrying to adjacent tables. "Mom's always been good at making do with scraps. It's her specialty." More laughter. Someone at the next table turned to stare. I felt my face burning with humiliation as tears threatened to spill. "That resourcefulness is admirable," one of the businessmen offered kindly. "Oh sure," Bradley agreed with a dismissive wave. "Very admirable. Very economical." He emphasized the word like it was something distasteful. As they moved on to the next table, I heard Amelia whisper something that made Bradley laugh again. I sat there, fork suspended above the cold food, feeling as if I'd been slapped. This was my son, the boy I'd read bedtime stories to every night, the child I'd nursed through chicken pox and broken bones, the young man whose college application essays I'd helped edit late into the night. And now he was using me as the punchline to a joke for his wealthy new family. I placed my napkin beside my barely touched plate and quietly stood. No one noticed as I slipped away from the table. No one saw me collect my small purse from the coat room. No one watched as I walked through the garden, past the valet stand, and onto the street to hail a taxi. In the back seat of the cab, I finally allowed the tears to fall, silent streams that the driver pretended not to notice. With each mile that separated me from the reception, the weight of decades of sacrifice pressed heavier on my heart. By the time I reached my hotel, I felt hollowed out, emptied of everything except a dull, throbbing pain. "You okay, lady?" the taxi driver asked as I counted out the fare, my hands shaking. I managed a small smile. "I will be." And somehow, saying those words aloud made me wonder if they might actually be true. My hotel room felt sterile and anonymous, much like my role in Bradley's life had become. I slipped off my shoes, the ones I'd spent hours searching for because they had to be elegant but not too expensive, comfortable but still appropriate for a mother of the groom. Now they just seemed like another wasted effort. Another attempt to fit into a world that had no place for me. I unzipped my dress, carefully hanging it in the closet, though I wondered if I'd ever want to wear it again. Every time I looked at it, I would remember this night, the humiliation, the casual cruelty from my only child. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I opened my purse and took out the small photo album I brought with me. It wasn't something I'd planned to share at the wedding, just a private reminder of the journey Bradley and I had taken together. I turned the pages slowly, tracing my finger over images of a gap-toothed boy building sandcastles, a gangly teenager proudly holding his science fair trophy, a handsome young man in his graduation cap and gown. There he was at 7, wearing the superhero costume I'd stayed up 3 nights sewing because we couldn't afford the store-bought version. And at 10, beaming with the puppy I'd adopted from the shelter after saving for 6 months to afford the pet deposit on our apartment. At 13, opening the Christmas present containing the calculator he needed for advanced math, not knowing I'd worked double shifts for weeks to buy it. Between the pages, I'd tucked some of the notes and cards he'd given me over the years. A Mother's Day card from 2nd grade. You are the best mom in the universe. I love you more than pizza, and that's a lot. A handwritten letter from summer camp. I miss you every day, Mom. The other kids' moms send them care packages with store-bought cookies, but yours are way better. You make everything better. A note left on the kitchen counter before his first date. Don't wait up, but maybe wait up a little because I want to tell you about it. When had that sweet, loving boy turned into the man who could mock his mother in front of a room full of strangers? When had my sacrifices transformed from acts of love into sources of shame for him? I found myself walking to the minibar, something I would normally consider an extravagance. Tonight, I needed the burn of whiskey, the momentary oblivion it might provide. I poured the tiny bottle into a glass and returned to my memories. Near the back of the album was a letter from Thomas, my late husband. He'd written it from the hospital during his final days, too weak to say all he wanted to say aloud. I'd read it so many times the creases were soft, the ink slightly faded. My dearest Eleanor, it began. As I face the end of my life, my greatest regret is leaving you to raise our son alone. But I have no fears about the kind of man he'll become under your guidance. You are the strongest, most loving person I've ever known. Teach Bradley to be like you, to value people over possessions, to find joy in giving rather than taking. Remind him where he comes from, the values we share. Most of all, make sure he knows that real success isn't measured by money or status, but by how well he loves. I'm counting on you for this, my love. It's the most important thing. I had failed. Despite all my efforts, all my sacrifices, I had somehow raised a son who cared more about impressing his wealthy in-laws than honoring the mother who had given everything for him. A son who could publicly humiliate me and laugh about it. For a moment, anger flared hot and bright. I considered calling my bank to cancel the check I'd written as a wedding gift, money I couldn't really afford to give but had offered anyway out of love. I imagined selling the house I'd planned to leave to Bradley, the house with a lifetime of memories, and using the money to travel the world without ever sending him a postcard. I pictured his face if I simply disappeared from his life the way he seemed to want me to. But vengeance had never been my way. Thomas wouldn't have wanted that for either of us. I thought of my own mother, a woman who had faced her share of hardships with quiet dignity. Eleanor, she used to tell me, you can't control how others treat you, but you can control how you respond. Choose the response you won't regret when you look in the mirror tomorrow. What response could I live with? Not doormat compliance, surely. The path I'd been following had led to this painful moment, with a son who didn't respect me and in-laws who saw me as an embarrassment to be tolerated. By allowing Bradley to treat me as an afterthought, I had enabled his worst instincts rather than nurturing his best ones. What would it look like to love Bradley while still maintaining my own dignity? What would it mean to honor Thomas's wishes for our son while also honoring myself? The answer came with surprising clarity. I needed to step back. Not out of spite or to punish Bradley, but to allow him to experience the consequences of his choices. I needed to reclaim my life, my identity beyond Bradley's mom. I needed to show him through actions, not words, what self-respect looked like. It might cost me my relationship with my son, at least temporarily. The thought sent a fresh wave of pain through me, but I forced myself to face it squarely. If our relationship could only exist with me as a doormat, was it really worth preserving in its current form? I took out my phone, intending to set an alarm for the morning, and saw there were no messages. No text from Bradley asking where I'd gone. No missed call from anyone at the wedding checking if I was okay. My absence hadn't even been noticed. That final confirmation should have broken me, but instead it cemented my resolve. Tomorrow would be the first day of my new life. A life where I valued myself as much as I'd always valued my son. I finished my whiskey, closed the photo album, and prepared for bed. As I laid my head on the pillow, I felt an unexpected sense of peace mingled with the sadness. For the first time in decades, I fell asleep thinking not of Bradley's needs but of my own. I woke at dawn, the pale light filtering through thin hotel curtains. For a moment I lay still, the events of the previous day washing over me anew. The cold leftovers, the laughter, the quiet taxi ride away from my son's wedding. But instead of the crushing despair I'd expected, I felt something different, clarity. I reached for my phone, half expecting to find concerned messages. There were none. No missed calls from Bradley wondering where I'd gone. No text from anyone at the wedding party. My departure had gone completely unnoticed. Rather than dwelling on this final confirmation of my invisibility, I sat up and made a list. My whole adult life had been defined by motherhood, by putting Bradley's needs before my own. Today would be different. Today, I would begin putting the pieces of Eleanor Parker back together. I showered and dressed in the casual clothes I'd packed for the day after the wedding, a day I'd imagine might include brunch with the newlyweds or helping clean up wedding gifts. Instead, I called the front desk and extended my hotel stay by 2 days. I would need time to put my plan into action before returning home. My first call was to my bank. I need to stop payment on a check, I explained to the representative. Check number 3087, made out to Bradley and Amelia Parker Hamilton for $5,000. Money I'd withdrawn from my modest retirement account. Money I couldn't afford to give but had offered anyway as a wedding gift. Reason for stop payment? The banker asked. The terms of the gift have changed, I said, surprising myself with my steady voice. Next, I called Martin Goldstein, the family lawyer who had helped me with Thomas's estate and had updated my will when Bradley graduated college. Martin, I need to make some changes to my will and other legal documents. How soon can we meet? Martin, always efficient, offered an appointment that afternoon. Everything okay, Eleanor? It will be, I replied. My third call was to Sandra Miller, a realtor who had recently sold my neighbor's house. I'm thinking of downsizing, I told her. I'd like to get an assessment of my home's current value. Between calls, I checked my email and found a message from the college where I'd taken a few courses years ago, trying to restart the education that had been interrupted when I married young. The subject line read, "Fall registration now open." I clicked through to the course catalog and began browsing, a long dormant excitement stirring within me. By lunchtime, I had a day's worth of appointments scheduled. I treated myself to room service, another small luxury I would normally deny myself. As I ate, I made a list of people I needed to contact about my decision, people who might be affected by the changes I was making. At 2 o'clock, I met with Martin in his downtown office. He listened without judgment as I explained what had happened and what I wanted to do. So, to summarize, he said when I finished, you want to remove Bradley as the primary beneficiary of your life insurance policy, replace him with a charitable foundation, revise your will to leave specific items to friends and distant relatives with only a token inheritance for Bradley, and initiate the process of selling your home rather than keeping it in the family as previously planned. That's correct, I confirmed. I'm not doing this to punish Bradley. I'm doing it because I've realized that handing him everything on a silver platter hasn't helped him become the man his father and I hoped he would be. And because I deserve to enjoy the fruits of my lifetime of labor. Martin nodded thoughtfully. I've known you for many years, Eleanor. You've always put Bradley first, sometimes to your own detriment. These changes are significant, but not unreasonable given the circumstances. Let's draw up the paperwork. By 4 o'clock, I was at the bank again, this time to access my safe deposit box. Inside was my mother's jewelry, pieces I'd inherited and kept safe with the intention of passing them on to Bradley's wife someday. The sapphire and pearl set I'd offered Amelia was there. along with several other family heirlooms. I removed them all, securing them in my purse. These treasures deserved to be worn and appreciated, not dismissed as hand-me-downs. My final stop of the day was the travel agency near my hotel. I'd passed it many times over the years, glancing at posters of exotic destinations in the window while hurrying to more practical appointments. Today, I pushed open the door and approached the desk. "I'd like to book a trip to Europe," I told the surprised agent. "Italy, France, and Spain. For one person. For at least 3 weeks." As she began typing into her computer, asking questions about preferences and budget, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. This trip had been a dream deferred for decades, always pushed aside for Bradley's needs or financial constraints. Now it would be my gift to myself. Back in my hotel room that evening, I was just settling in with the course catalog, circling classes that interested me when my phone rang. It was Judith Hamilton, Amelia's mother. "Eleanor," she began without preamble, "I'm calling about your wedding gift. The amount seems rather modest given the circumstances." Amelia and Bradley were quite disappointed. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the strength I'd found that morning. "Actually, Judith, my gift to them was quite substantial. The check was merely a token. My real gift was selling my vintage Mustang convertible to pay for the rehearsal dinner at Le Bernardin. A dinner, I might add, where I was seated far from my son and treated like an unwelcome acquaintance rather than the host." There was a moment of stunned silence before Judith recovered. "Well, I'm sure there was some misunderstanding about the seating arrangements. In any case, Bradley mentioned you left the reception early." He was concerned. "Was he? He hasn't called or texted to check on me," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Please let him know I'm fine, and that I'll be in touch when I return from my trip." "Trip? What trip?" Judith's confusion was evident. "My European tour. Something I've been postponing for far too long. Goodbye, Judith." I hung up feeling lighter than I had in years, despite the confrontation. Setting boundaries was new territory for me, but it felt right. Before preparing for bed, I sat down to write a letter to Bradley. Not an angry tirade or a guilt-inducing lament, but an honest expression of my feelings and my decision to change our relationship dynamic. "Dear Bradley," I began. "First, congratulations on your marriage. I wish you and Amelia a lifetime of happiness together. I'm writing to explain my early departure from your wedding and the changes I'm making in my life going forward." I wrote about the incident with the leftovers, his hurtful comment, and how it had crystallized feelings that had been building for years. I explained my decision to revise my will and sell the family home, not as a punishment but as a necessary step in establishing a healthier relationship between us. I told him about my planned trip to Europe and my return to college. "I will always love you, Bradley. Nothing can change that. But love without respect isn't the relationship I want with my son, and it's not what your father would have wanted for us either. I hope that someday we can build something new together, something based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation. Until then, I need to focus on rebuilding my life and my sense of self-worth. I hope you can understand, even if you don't agree. Love, Mom." I sealed the letter in an envelope, addressing it to Bradley and Amelia's new apartment. I would mail it before leaving for Europe, giving them time to process my words while I was away discovering new parts of myself. As I prepared for sleep, I realized I felt no anger, no desire for revenge. Just a calm determination to reclaim my dignity and create a life that honored all parts of me, not just my identity as Bradley's mother. For the first time in years, I fell asleep thinking about possibilities rather than regrets. 2 months passed like a dream. Italy embraced me with its art and architecture. France seduced me with its food and wine. And Spain awakened something passionate in my soul that had been dormant for too long. I walked for miles each day, discovering not just ancient cities but my own resilience. I ate meals alone at charming cafes without feeling self-conscious. I made conversation with fellow travelers and locals alike, surprised by how easily I connected with people when I wasn't defining myself solely as Bradley's mother. I returned home tanned, rejuvenated, and ready for the next chapter. The for sale sign in my yard no longer filled me with melancholy, but with anticipation. The real estate market was strong, and Sandra had already shown the house to several interested parties. My first day back, I registered for classes at the local community college. Art history, creative writing, and introduction to psychology. At 68, I was easily the oldest student in each class, but instead of feeling out of place, I felt inspired. My life experience gave me a perspective my younger classmates appreciated, and their energy and fresh outlooks challenged me to see the world differently. Through a classmate in my writing course, I learned about a women's shelter that needed volunteers. Soon I was spending 2 afternoons a week there, helping women who were rebuilding their lives after difficult circumstances. Their courage humbled me, and their gratitude for even small kindnesses reminded me of the value of human connection. At home, I began reclaiming spaces that had been preserved as shrines to Bradley's childhood. His old bedroom became my art studio, filled with canvases and the scent of oil paints. The formal dining room we rarely used transformed into a reading nook with a comfortable chair, good lighting, and bookshelves filled with volumes I'd always wanted to explore. I started a small container garden on my patio, nurturing herbs and vegetables with the same care I'd once devoted exclusively to my son. I joined a weekly walking group, making new friends who knew me as Eleanor the aspiring artist or Eleanor the passionate reader, not just as someone's mother. Through it all, there was no word from Bradley. I'd mailed my letter before leaving for Europe but had received no response. Occasionally, I saw updates on social media. Bradley and Amelia at charity galas, on weekend trips to the Hamptons, attending exclusive events with her family. They looked happy, and despite everything, I was glad for that. Then, 3 months after the wedding, my phone rang with Bradley's number. I answered with a calm I wouldn't have thought possible before. "Mom." His voice sounded tight, controlled. "We need to talk about the changes you've made to your will. Martin Goldstein contacted me as a professional courtesy, so that was why he'd finally reached out. Not concern for me, not regret for his behavior, but self-interest." "Hello, Bradley. Yes, I've made some changes to my estate planning. I'm surprised Martin disclosed those details to you." He didn't give specifics, just mentioned there had been significant revisions that might affect me. Bradley's voice had an edge I recognized from childhood, the tone he used when he wasn't getting his way. "And you're selling the house? Our family home? Without even discussing it with me?" "The house is in my name, Bradley. I've decided to downsize to something more manageable and more suited to my current needs." I kept my voice even, factual. "I've accepted an offer from a lovely young family. They have 2 children who will fill the place with new memories. But that house was supposed to be mine eventually. We talked about this years ago. Amelia and I had plans to use it as a weekend property." I closed my eyes briefly, centering myself. "Plans change, Bradley. Just as your plans for including me in your wedding changed without consultation. Is that what this is about? You're punishing me because you felt slighted at the wedding. This isn't punishment, Bradley. This is me making decisions that honor my needs and wants, just as you've been doing for years." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "I've spent my entire adult life putting you first. Now it's time for me to prioritize myself." There was a long silence before he spoke again, his voice smaller somehow. "Amelia's parents are upset about the insurance policy changes too. They were counting on that money as part of our long-term financial planning." The audacity of this statement momentarily took my breath away. They were counting on my death benefit? A policy I've paid premiums on for decades to secure my own future and help with my final expenses. "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds bad," Bradley admitted. "But you always said everything you had would be mine someday." "That was before I realized what kind of man you've become," I said softly. "A man who could mock his mother in front of wedding guests. A man who could laugh about me eating leftovers while everyone else got hot, fresh food." Another long pause. "I didn't think you heard that," he finally said. "I heard. And so did everyone at my table. And several people at nearby tables. It was just a joke, Mom. You're being too sensitive."
"No, Bradley.
For too long, I've not been sensitive enough to my own dignity. That's changing now." I could hear muffled voices on his end of the line. Then Bradley's voice, less confident than before. "Look, Mom. I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt. That wasn't my intention. But these changes you're making, they're affecting Amelia and me significantly. Her parents are questioning our financial stability now. I imagine that's uncomfortable for you, I acknowledged. Just as being treated like an unwelcome stranger at my only child's wedding was uncomfortable for me. What do you want from me? His frustration was evident. An official apology?
Fine, I'm sorry.
Now can we talk about reversing these financial decisions? What I want is a relationship based on mutual respect, Bradley. Not one where I'm only valued for what I can provide materially. I took a deep breath. I'm not going to reverse the decisions I've made. The house sale is already in escrow. The will and insurance changes are finalized. What I am willing to do is work on building a new kind of relationship with you. If you're interested. The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally he spoke, his voice subdued. Amelia's father withdrew his offer to make me a partner in his firm. He said if I can't manage my own family relationships, he can't trust me with client relationships. This was unexpected. I'm sorry to hear that, Bradley. That must be difficult for you. Yeah, well, turns out he had a complicated relationship with his own mother. Something about her selling family property that was supposed to be his inheritance. Bradley's laugh was hollow. He said I need to make things right with you before he'll reconsider. Not exactly the motivation I'd hoped for, but it was a start. And is that what you want? To make things right? I don't know what that even looks like anymore, Mom. Everything's different now. Yes, it is, I agreed. Why don't we start with dinner? Just the two of us. No agenda, no financial discussions. Just a mother and son getting reacquainted. 3 days later, we met at a neutral location. A moderately priced restaurant halfway between our homes. The conversation was stilted at first, both of us carefully avoiding landmines. But as the meal progressed, something shifted. Bradley asked about my classes, showing genuine interest in my art history projects. I inquired about his work, listening without judgment to his frustrations and ambitions. By dessert, we'd reached a fragile truce. Not the unconditional devotion I'd once given him, not the entitlement he'd come to expect, but something new and tentatively hopeful. I'd like you to come to dinner at our place, Bradley said as we prepared to leave. Amelia's been asking about you. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Has she? Bradley had the grace to look embarrassed. Well, she will be. Once I tell her about our conversation. She's not as cold as she sometimes appears. She's just used to a different kind of family dynamic. I'd be happy to come to dinner, I agreed. As long as I'm served the same food as everyone else. He winced but nodded. That's fair. And Mom? I really am sorry. Not just because of Frederick's reaction, but because you deserved better. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a start. As I drove home that night, I realized that by finally valuing myself, I had given Bradley the opportunity to see me as a person worthy of respect, rather than just a supporting character in his life story. The dinner at Bradley and Amelia's apartment the following week was surprisingly pleasant. Amelia seemed to view me with new eyes, perhaps seeing for the first time that I was more than just Bradley's embarrassingly middle-class mother. She asked thoughtful questions about my travels and seemed genuinely impressed by my return to education. I never knew you had such a background in literature, she remarked when I mentioned my college studies from decades ago. My senior thesis at Vassar was on female protagonists in 19th-century novels. That was my special interest too, I told her, watching surprise register on her face. I had to abandon my studies when I married, but I always kept reading. I could show you my collection sometime. I'd like that, she said, and I believed she meant it. By the time I left that evening, something fundamental had shifted. Bradley walked me to my car, lingering after Amelia had gone back inside. You seem different, Mom, he observed. More. I don't know. Present. Confident. I am different, I acknowledged. And that's not a bad thing for either of us. He nodded slowly. I'm starting to see that. As I drove away, I realized that by refusing to be the doormat I'd been at the wedding, I'd actually opened the door to a potentially healthier relationship with my son. It wasn't what I'd expected, but it was something genuine beginning to grow from the ashes of what had been burned away. 1 year after the wedding that had broken my heart, I stood in my new condominium adjusting the cap on my head. Not a fancy hat for another wedding, but the square academic cap that symbolized the achievement of a lifelong dream. At 69 years old, I had finally completed my bachelor's degree in liberal studies, with a minor in art history. My new home was smaller than the house I'd raised Bradley in, but it felt more truly mine than any place I'd ever lived. The walls displayed my own paintings alongside art I'd discovered during my travels. Bookshelves overflowed with volumes I was finally making time to read. The kitchen was stocked with exotic spices and oils I'd learned to use in the cooking classes I'd taken on a whim. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Bradley and Amelia, looking somehow both the same and different from the couple who had humiliated me a year ago. "Congratulations, graduate," Bradley said, handing me a bouquet of lilies, my favorite flowers. He remembered. "We're so proud of you, Eleanor," Amelia added, and the warmth in her voice seemed genuine. The changes in our relationship hadn't happened overnight. There had been setbacks and difficult conversations, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But gradually, steadily, we had built something new from the ruins of what had been broken. Bradley had found a position at a different investment firm, one where he was judged on his own merits rather than his connections. The adjustment had been challenging for him, but ultimately rewarding. "I actually feel like I've earned my success," he confided to me over coffee one day. "It's different from just being Frederick's son-in-law." Amelia had surprised everyone by starting a literacy program in an underserved community, inspired partly by conversations with me about my love of literature and my volunteer work at the women's shelter. She'd invited me to speak to her group about returning to education later in life, and the experience had brought us closer. Now, as we prepared to attend my graduation ceremony together, I marveled at the unexpected gifts that had come from that painful wedding day. "Before we go," Bradley said, looking uncharacteristically nervous, "there's something we wanted to tell you." Amelia smiled and placed her hand on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby. You're going to be a grandmother." Joy washed through me, pure and uncomplicated. "That's wonderful news," I said, embracing them both. "We've been talking," Bradley continued, "about family traditions and values we want to pass on." He exchanged a glance with Amelia before continuing. "And we've realized that some of the most important ones came from you, Mom. Your resilience, your belief in education, your ability to see beauty in simple things. We want our child to know those values," Amelia added. "We want them to know you, the real you, not just as Bradley's mother, but as Eleanor Parker, with all your strength and wisdom." I blinked back tears touched by their words. I'd like that very much. As we drove to the graduation ceremony, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The path from that wedding dinner of cold leftovers to this moment of warm connection had been neither straight nor easy. There had been painful conversations, moments of doubt, and the hard work of establishing new boundaries while keeping my heart open. My volunteer work at the women's shelter had expanded into a part-time position, as a mentor for women rebuilding their lives after abuse or homelessness. Many of these women had stories similar to mine, not of physical abuse but of emotional erasure, of having their worth diminished until they almost believed it themselves. "You showed me it's never too late to reclaim your dignity," Maria, one of my ments, told me after securing her first apartment at age 57. "Watching you go back to school gave me courage to believe I could start over too." I had formed deep friendships with women in my age group who were also reinventing themselves after decades of putting everyone else first. Our weekly coffee meetings had become a highlight of my life, filled with laughter, mutual support, and occasional righteous indignation at the societal expectations that had shaped our earlier choices. After the graduation ceremony, as we celebrated over dinner at a restaurant where I was treated with the same respect as every other guest, Bradley raised his glass in a toast. "To my mother, Eleanor Parker. You taught me what true strength looks like, even when I wasn't wise enough to recognize it. I'm sorry it took me so long to see your worth, but I'm grateful for the second chance to be the son you deserve." I clinked my glass against Amelia's. "To second chances," I said. "And to cold leftovers." Bradley looked confused. "Cold leftovers?" "Sometimes," I explained, "what seems like the end of something is actually the beginning of something better. Those cold leftovers at your wedding could have been just another humiliation I swallowed silently." Instead, they became the catalyst for me to reclaim my life. I still feel terrible about that, Bradley admitted. About all of it. Don't, I said sincerely. I wouldn't change what happened now, knowing where it led. Sometimes we need to reach a breaking point before we can rebuild something stronger. Later that night, alone in my condo, I added the graduation tassel to a memory box I'd created, not just of Bradley's achievements this time but of my own. My degree. My first sold painting. The journal I'd kept during my European travels. A letter from a woman at the shelter thanking me for helping her find her voice again. The journey from being served cold leftovers to serving others had transformed me in ways I never could have imagined. By standing up for my own worth, I had not only improved my relationship with my son, but had found a purpose larger than motherhood alone. The woman who had slipped away unnoticed from that wedding reception no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who recognized her own value without needing external validation. Someone who could love her son without sacrificing her dignity in the process. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text from Bradley. Thank you for today, and for showing me what courage looks like. Love you, Mom. I smiled as I typed my reply. Thank you for learning to see me. Love you too. The cold leftovers that had once symbolized my insignificance had become the first ingredient in a feast of self-discovery. By refusing to accept scraps from my son's table, I had found my place at a banquet of my own making. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family members who took you for granted? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people we love most. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of transformation and self-discovery. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and write a new chapter in your life story. Thank you for listening, and may you always know your true worth.